Celeste is a 2D platform game where the main character, Madeline, tries to climb a mountain. It was made by Noel Barrett and Maddie Thorson in 2018 with Lena Raine as the composer. I'd like to think that I'm one of the most average Celeste fans. I've started the grueling process of trying to figure out how to speedrun the game. I've tried and somehow failed to download modded content, and I have a few pieces of miscellaneous memorabilia. The first time I finished the summit was just about a year ago, and I finished Farewell about 4 months ago, and have gotten through all of the seasides. Despite me finishing each chapter at least a couple of times, I still feel like I'm fairly new to the game. There's so much more content surrounding the game, whether it be part of it, like the Golden Strawberries, or downloadable content, that I feel like I've barely dipped my toes in. One of my favorite parts of the game is the music, and the moment that I realized that you could buy sheet music for it online, I instantly did so. I quite literally did not hesitate. I stumbled across it while trying to buy those crystal heart pins, found it, and instantly added it to cart. Can I play piano? Not really. Could I figure out how to play these pieces? Over the course of a couple years, I could probably figure one out. Before I had gotten the piano music, I had already known some of the intricacies throughout the music, but it felt as though there was still so much more for me to understand. Lena Raine did such a phenomenal job at the compositions for the game, and the detail throughout it instantly grabbed my attention. For example, one of the things that I had already known about was the fact that she gave each character a specific instrument. Madeline, the anxiety-ridden main character, was given a piano. Subsequently, Madeline, the main antagonist of the game, whose name is quite literally the words bad and Madeline combined into one word, is notated through a synthesizer. Raine continues this through two other characters. Theo, a character who is recognized through his guitar melody and acts as an older brother figure for Madeline, and Oshiro, a ghostly owner of a hotel who is known through his theremin-like synthesizer. The only character that isn't identified by an instrument is Granny, the old woman who lives at the base of the mountain and offers Madeline both critiques and advice throughout her journey. Raine said that Granny lacks an instrument because she embodies the power of the mountain and is a fairly omnipresent figure. Throughout this video, I'll be exploring the music of Celeste and how Raine uses it to add to the plot and characterization in the game. Between these specific instruments attached to characters and the similar key signatures, Raine is able to keep a consistent and similar sound for the character. This keeps the player immersed in primarily the gameplay, while the music in the background alerts them to mood changes in subtle ways, which brings me to my first point. Firstly, the music that I'll be looking at is available from the Celeste piano collections, which you can buy on Fangamer, and I'll have that linked in the description. The pieces in order are Prologue, First Steps, Resurrections Awake, Scattered and Lost, Quiet and Falling, In the Mirror, Madeline and Theo, Confronting Myself, Little Goth, Reach for the Summit, Exhale, and My Dearest Friends. On streaming platforms, Resurrections and Awake are two separate pieces that transition incredibly smoothly between each other. Quiet and Falling and In the Mirror are the same, but in both of these cases, they're listed as the same piece in the piano collections. For that, I'll be viewing them as the same piece while looking at any specifics. In these 11 pieces, there's a few main key signatures that are used. 2 pieces are in A major, 4 in A minor, 3 in C major, 1 in C minor, and 1 in E minor. First, in order to understand the significance of the flow of the music, I'm going to explain how the key signatures work. There are 12 key signatures. The ones we'll be looking at in this case are C major, C minor, and A minor. So, if you look at A major and A minor, they're what you would call parallel keys. They have the same letter, but they have a different amount of sharps and flats in the key signature. A major and A minor are parallel keys, C major and C minor are parallel keys. The first 2 pieces of Celeste, which are Prologue and First Steps, are in A major. The piece after that, which is Resurrections Awake, is in A minor. This initial shift of a key signature that goes from the major to the parallel minor is one that's also used throughout classical music. I recently played Brahms' 4th Symphony, which is in E minor. The first movement is in E minor, and the second is in E major. The same goes for Beethoven's 7th Symphony, which is in A minor. The first movement, A minor, second movement, A major. Tchaikovsky's 4th Symphony has the first movement in F minor and the second in F major. Shostakovich's 5th Symphony The first two movements are in A minor and the third in A major. The shift is something that's commonly used throughout several different genres of music, and it creates a very smooth transition for the listener, and it makes sense that Raine would utilize it in this music. The next piece, Scattered and Lost, is also in A minor, but the one after that, Quiet and Falling in the Mirror, is in C minor. Now, you can connect the keys of these two pieces of music through both parallel and relative keys. Relative keys are the ones where the amount of sharps or flats in the key signature is the same, but the letter is not. C major has no sharps or flats, and neither does A minor. Because of that, they're relative keys. Scattered and Lost is in A minor, which is the relative minor of C major. The parallel minor of C major is C minor, which is the key of Quiet and Falling in the Mirror. These keys revolve around C major without actually being a present key signature in these pieces. From there, the music for Madeline and Theo goes to C major, the parallel major to C minor, and then to A minor for Confronting Myself and Little Goth, bringing it back to its relative minor. However, after that, the key moves to E minor for Reach for the Summit. Now, at first glance, E minor seems out of place in comparison to the rest of the key signatures that we've looked at, but it's really not. It's the next key in the circle of fifths. You have A minor, and then you move one over, and you have E minor. The final two pieces, Exhale and My Dearest Friends, go back to C major, so it goes A minor, E minor, and then back to A minor's relative major of C major. So, with the key signature outline being said, I'll be going through two pieces in particular and taking a closer look at them. Those two pieces are Quiet and Falling in the Mirror and Madeline and Theo. Quiet and Falling in the Mirror plays in the 5th chapter, Mirror Temple. Quiet and Falling plays in the first two subsections, the start and the depths, and In the Mirror plays in the last three, the unraveling, the search, and the rescue. It's quite fitting that the physically darkest chapter in the game, the one where you have to turn on most of the lights yourself, is the one where the music matches the trepidation that the characters feel. The description for Quiet and Falling is deeply melancholic, which most definitely comes across throughout the whole thing. The tempo marking is rubato, which means that it's meant to move at a slightly inconsistent tempo. It moves with the emotion of the piece, and by having a tempo that's slightly off-kilter, it helps add to the anxiety that Madeline feels at this point in time. The first important part is that opening motif, which is the most commonly used one throughout the music, and those opening notes in particular. With the key signature being C minor, the tonic of it is C natural. The bass clef line opens with the C natural and a G natural, the tonic and the fifth. Every two measures, the bass note, the C in this case, lowers chromatically. So, in measure 3, the C becomes a B natural. In measure 5, it'll become a B flat, etc., etc. Once it reaches a G natural, it drops down a whole step to F natural, and then back up to G natural. From there, the cycle repeats. While looking at the treble clef line in the first few measures, there's another pattern that begins to arise. The and of beat 2 and beat 3, along with beat 4 and the and of beat 4, are the same two intervals in each measure where this phrase shows up. Highlighted in blue here are the ands of beat 2 and beat 4, which are both an E flat. Beat 3 and the and of beat 4, highlighted in pink, are always either a G natural or a B flat. For situations where it's an E flat to a G natural, the interval between them is a major third. And for those where it's an E flat to a B flat, it's a perfect fifth. This motif happens in measures 1 to 16, then repeats in measure 17 to 32. This time, however, it adds octave whole notes that are sustained, usually throughout at least 2 measures. The first one is a D natural at measure 17, and it's a major second above the bass note, a C natural. Next comes G natural octaves at measure 22 over an A natural bass note, making it a minor 7th. Then a B flat at measure 27, which is over a bass note of G natural. This is where the notes become more consonant than dissonant because this interval is a minor third. From there, it's a C natural over an F natural, a perfect fifth, and a B natural over a G natural, a major third. Another motif begins at measure 33, but it mimics the opening one. As the same general idea, every 2 measures, the bass note drops chromatically, but this time it's only until it reaches an A natural. The and of beat 1 and beat 2 are G natural and D natural, making them perfect fifths each and every time. This goes on from measure 33 to measure 49 until the main theme repeats itself at measure 50. At measure 65, whole notes and half notes are once again added in to elaborate on that theme in a new way, and measures 95 and 96 repeat the motif from measure 33. However, at 97, the music consists primarily of chords along with grace notes leading into half notes. Most of these chords are variations of the tonic chord, which would be a C, E flat, and a G natural, except for the inverted fifth chord, which is a G, B flat, and D natural. They're nice and consonant, which helps lead into measure 106, which is where In the Mirror begins. Now, with both the title of this chapter and the title of this piece containing the topic of mirrors, it makes quite a bit of sense that the music itself is also mirrored. Part of that are the vocals that play in the background. Lena Raine supposedly recorded these while in a dark closet and then reversed the vocals to kind of give the same energy that Madeline was feeling at this point, which was full of anxiety and not being sure where the right direction was. The vocals consist of things like, sometimes I don't really know what's going on anymore, or I just look in the mirror and I don't know who I'm looking at, and more anxieties that Madeline feels at this point in the game. This adds to the unsettling feeling of the music, despite the fact that the average player doesn't understand what is being said. In the Mirror continues to open on the fifth of C natural to G natural that was established throughout Quiet and Falling. Similarly, it's also meant to have the uneven sense as described by the tempo marking of off balance, never quite settled. The twisted around retelling of Quiet and Falling continues with measure 117, where the main theme is stated. The bass note also has a pattern throughout this, but it's one note in one measure, such as an F natural, and the next measure is that same note, but an octave lower. At one point, one of the notes goes down a minor seventh from a G natural to an A flat, but that is the only situation in this phrase that happens, so that one can be kind of put to the side. More importantly, the treble clef line throughout this part has the same major thirds and perfect fifths as Quiet and Falling. Measure 127 adds in octaves, and measure 143 even has a reversal of the third motif in Quiet and Falling. These pieces are meant to mirror each other in all sense of the word until the ending two measures. As you can see, the notes go down, an E flat, D natural, G natural, and B natural, then back up that same line until it reaches the last note. That note is a B flat, the seventh note of the chord, leaving the piece feeling not completely resolved. Given the fact that at the beginning of the next chapter, Reflection, is where Madeline and Theo are finally able to have a conversation and talk about what has previously happened to them, it is quite fitting that the last notes heard of Mirror Temple are not exactly calming ones. In sharp contrast of the stress that was riddled throughout both Mirror Temple and Quiet and Falling in the Mirror, Madeline and Theo brings a relaxing atmosphere to the start of Reflection. While Quiet and Falling in the Mirror was in C minor, Madeline and Theo is its parallel key, C major. It continues the use of opening the piece with a perfect fifth, both in the treble and the bass lines. Now, for the first page of this piece, there's a distinct lack of bar lines. With the tempo once again being rubato, having no bar lines just adds to the free-flowing nature of the opening of this piece. There's also no time signature, so when there's a note on the music that says to play it freely, it literally means to play it as freely as you please. It's calming. It's relaxing, and it's quickly interrupted by a synthesizer beat. The synthesizer beat is 4 eighth notes over and over again. E natural, B natural, A natural, and back to B natural. From measures 10 to 27, where it's then taken an octave and a third lower. Those notes become C natural, G natural, F natural, and back to G natural, and those go from measure 28 to 47. Once that steady beat drops, the music changes to a more syncopated rhythm. Although it's meant to feel offbeat, it still doesn't feel off-kilter like the way Quiet and Falling in the Mirror does. There's also a lot of perfect intervals throughout this next part, from measures 48 to the end of the piece at measure 100. Most of these intervals are octaves and fifths, with some perfect fourths, and other intervals scattered around. There's also some that neatly make up chords, such as a simple G major chord on beat 3 of measure 50. However, until the end of the piece, it remains complexly beautiful as Madeline tries to figure out who she is as she climbs this mountain. She's questioning her relationship with Madeline, along with realizing the true friendship that she has with Theo, and the music reflects that, which brings me into this next portion. As I just stated, Madeline and Theo plays at the beginning of Reflection, and as the two sit around a campfire and discuss the events that have happened to them leading to this point. This moment is where the relationship between the music and the plot is highlighted. Plot-wise, Reflection is an amalgamation of all the plot beforehand. Madeline and Theo have known each other since the beginning of Madeline's journey, and an important development for them is at the end of Golden Ridge. While trying to ride on a gondola to get to the Mirror Temple, Theo accidentally makes it stop working and sends Madeline into a full-blown panic attack. Theo then goes on to teach her a technique to calm herself down. One can imagine a feather floating in front of them and try to keep it in the air through consistent and slow breathing. They quickly went their separate ways at the beginning of Mirror Temple, but they ended up crossing paths once again when Madeline found Theo stuck in a crystal. #blessed. Anyway, the chapter consists of Madeline and Theo being confronted by different parts of their mental states. Madeline keeps getting intercepted by Madeline, and Theo is constantly followed around by eyes. Which finally brings us to the actual start of Reflection. Here are Madeline and Theo, both freshly traumatized from their experiences in the temple, sitting together and trying to relax. So naturally, the music copies that. As I stated earlier, each character has an instrument that's attached to them, and Theo's is the guitar. From the very beginning of this chapter, as Theo and Madeline talk about their lives before attempting to climb the mountain and their own struggles with mental health, the piece Madeline and Theo plays. Although there's a violin synthesizer playing in the background of the piece, the primary instrument throughout it is Theo's guitar. This causes the chapter to start in a very soothing manner, which is very much so needed after the events of the previous chapters. The use of specific character instruments continues throughout other part of the chapters. For example, after Theo and Madeline finish their conversation, she continues her climb to the top of the mountain. A mix of piano and synthesizer plays during her ascent, a sign of her growing confidence in herself. She utilizes the feathers to help her get her way to the top, a callback to when Theo helped her through her panic attack. She's finally more sure of herself and feels confident in her ability to confront Madeline. By this point, the synthesizer's getting pretty loud. Throughout their conversation, Madeline's trying to convince both herself and Madeline that she's better off without Madeline, claiming that she's cruel and paranoid. It's at this point where the piano is fully overpowered by the synthesizer. Madeline starts literally climbing out of her character box, fully overwhelming the screen. And it's at this moment where Madeline takes Madeline and drives her down the mountain, therefore removing all of her previous work. After the sudden and dramatic descent, the music has a surprising calmness to it. It's calming because Madeline's starting to acknowledge that she just has to get through this. She just has to keep climbing, and eventually she'll make her way to the top. By the time Madeline gets near Madeline again, there's a growing resentment on Madeline's side. She's upset and frustrated, which, is kind of reasonable since Madeline previously told her that she had to get rid of her in order to become a better person. While getting closer to their confrontation, the synthesizer beat picks back up. The music develops and adds more percussion to give it a steady forward movement as Madeline becomes more sure of her actions. With their rapidly approaching showdown, there's only one more thing that can be expected: a boss theme. The tension between Madeline and Madeline that's been building up since the very beginning is finally coming to a head. They're fighting, they're technically bouncing off of each other while one of them tries to throw red dots at the other, they're arguing. And finally, out of seemingly nowhere, things calm. They do something that's actually productive. They talk about it. As they finally communicate, the music mirrors it. It goes back to being a calming piano piece. Madeline even levels up. She can dash twice now instead of just once, and the music remains that steady, consistent piece. However, it does end up becoming more complex as Madeline becomes more sure of herself. And it's right here, at the very end of this chapter, where we see Madeline finally starting to turn into the version of herself that she's been wanting to be this whole time. By accepting all parts of herself, including the parts of herself that she thought were bad, she's finally reached a place where she can grow and climb the summit. Which brings us to the 7th chapter, the summit. There's only one piece that plays throughout it, and it's Reach for the Summit, which is the piece in E minor. Structurally, it's very similar throughout the entire piece, so I'm going to focus on how it highlights the music from previous chapters throughout it. Right from the beginning, there's the 16th notes. They keep it steady and moving forward, which is exactly what Madeline is doing at this point. The music solidifies her I can do it mentality and keeps her moving forward. Also, as the chapter continues onward, the electric synthesizer continues to grow, symbolizing a time where Madeline and Madeline can not only coexist peacefully, but also work together to help themselves grow. A unique aspect of this chapter is how it goes through each of the previous chapters. As I mentioned earlier, Raine utilized a specific instrument for each character. While going through the Celestial Resort, the hotel that Oshiro runs, the theremin synthesizer that notates Oshiro's presence gets added back into the music. The use of previous motifs persists when Madeline reaches the Mirror Temple portion of the summit. Like with the piece Quiet and Falling in the Mirror, there are reversed lyrics throughout this part of Reach for the Summit. It's the same technique that was used during the actual Mirror Temple chapter, once again giving homage to the previous music throughout the game. Now, at the end of the summit, the music begins to quiet down. With the cultivation of everything she's done to get there, Madeline finally gets to have a quiet reprieve as she gets closer. When she actually reaches that flag and her and Madeline separate from one another, the music silences. There's only the faint wind around them as they stare over the edge of the mountain, a sense of almost awe flooding over both the characters and the players as they realize that they have, in fact, reached the summit. And then Granny dies. Now, there's no copies of the official music from Farewell that I could buy, but I don't care. I'm going to talk about it anyways, because I cannot get enough of this music. There's still elements of the music in the standard game, such as specific instruments used to symbolize certain characters, but there's also a constant addition of strings. This part in particular always stood out to me. Throughout the chapter, Madeline's been chasing this bird because she thinks it's part of Granny, just like Madeline is part of her, and by getting hold of the bird, she'll finally be able to get a hold of Granny. But it's at this moment that she confesses to Madeline that she knows she's dreaming and that she's in deeper than she thought. What I truly love about this, though, is how calm yet full it feels in comparison to other pieces throughout Farewell. For example, anytime I hear Final Defiance, I feel the exact same dread that Madeline feels, the idea that she is fully alone. The use of steady percussion and the strings holding out such long notes fills me with such this intense feeling of dread and loneliness and makes me almost dizzy with it. This is definitely the part of Farewell that I consistently perform the worst on. I genuinely cannot stop listening to the music for long enough to actually play the game at this point, even though it can seem as though there's no music actually playing in the background. It's brilliant. But at that moment, where Madeline is finally able to talk to Madeline and put her thoughts into words, a familiar motif starts to play. It's the main theme from Little Goth, which plays at the very end of Reflection, right when Madeline and Madeline truly realize that they can work together. In the same vein, Reconciliation is at a part of Farewell where Madeline accepts that she can continue on with Madeline's help instead of just avoiding her. It's a beautiful reuse of a previously existing theme, and similarly to Little Goth and Reach for the Summit, Reconciliation leads into Farewell, a piece that plays as Madeline, Madeline, and the bird work on making their way back to reality. It's all wonderfully thought out, and the parallels between those really drove home for me the way that Raine used theory and motifs that she had previously established to enhance the experience for the person playing the game. As soon as I finished Farewell, I went back to replay the first 7 chapters and was astounded when I realized those similarities. There's also Vovo et Vovo, restating Madeline and Theo's theme as the two realized that Granny and Theo's grandfather actually knew one another. And to be honest, I started crying when I first heard it. I think it was a mix of the relief of finally being done with that last screen of Farewell, but it also definitely had to do with how beautiful this piece is. It's such a wonderful way to wrap up everything that had happened throughout the game, both plot-wise and music-wise. It's not quite as vibey as Wavedash.ppt, but let's be honest, I don't think anything is. Those 50 seconds of music made their way into my Spotify Wrapped of this past year because I listened to it over and over again while I study. Who needs lo-fi when you have Wavedash? Due to me being a film studies major, I unfortunately cannot consume any media without trying to figure out the genre of it. For a while, I just kind of assumed that Celeste was a sort of magical realism, but after taking a single film class, I started to think that it's more so hallucinatory realism. Hallucinatory realism consists of a delineation from reality, while also enhancing the aesthetic of it. It has this idea of the story belonging to a dream or a fantasy. That's literally what the entirety of Old Sight and Farewell are. Old Sight is supposedly a dream, because she wakes up at the end, but her interactions with Madeline also happened. It's the same with Farewell. Again, those are just some silly little thoughts I've had about it, because the more I try to think about what's real or not in this game, I just get more confused. On a completely unrelated note, I took a B-reel of myself working on this project the other week. One of my friends, Oliver, pointed out that the music from Quiet and Falling looked similar to Bach and requested that I mention its rhythmic similarity to the prelude to Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. To be honest, I did not have time to analyze it to the extent that I think he wanted me to. I started to, and the main thing that stood out to me was a similar pattern at the beginning. The first measure of the prelude to Bach's First Cello Suite opens with a perfect fifth, a G natural to a D natural, similarly to Quiet and Falling. The second measure moves the D natural to an E natural, and that keeps happening throughout the phrase. The and of B1 moves up to the next note in the scale, just like the notes of Quiet and Falling move down chromatically. To be honest, that's as far as I got. I stopped being able to look at the sheet music for Quiet and Falling without thinking of that Bach prelude, and to be honest, I didn't want that. I want to be able to separate the two pieces of music, and they got blurred so quickly. So, on to my next point, which is another film-related thing that I can't stop thinking about in relation to the game. The two different ways that music shows up in media is by being source music or underscored music. Source music happens within the context of a storyline, such as a character listening to music that the audience can also hear, and undersource music is music that plays in the background of a scene that only the audience can hear. This most commonly shows up as specifically composed music for that source of media. So, when I was trying to figure out what type of music Celeste has, I assumed it was underscoring. Like, she's climbing a mountain, and there's obviously something magical that's happening, but I didn't think that she could actually hear the music that was being played. Until she went underwater. Then all of a sudden the music got muffled the same way it does in real life. In conclusion, I'm once again confused. My brother told me something along the lines of how music in video games is obviously not going to be the same as it is in films, and since he plays more video games than I do, which is just Celeste and Mario Kart, then I'm going to take his word on that. With that being said, those are my closing thoughts on the music of Celeste. Overall, it is a beautiful and intricate soundtrack that emotionally adds so much to the game. A lot of this credit also goes to the sound designers, the musicians, and the arranger. I wouldn't have the sheet music if it hadn't been arranged for piano by Trevor Allen Gomes, who took this brilliant and hyper-saturated music and made it feasible for one person to play it. All the music that I mentioned throughout this game was composed by Lena Raine, and once again, the link to the sheet music will be in the description.